What if I told you there are moments in history so bizarre they sound like bad fiction? A war started over a single bucket. A king who won a battle after being dead for hours. A city that elected a dog as its mayor and kept re-electing him. These aren't legends or internet myths. They're all real. But the question is, why don't we learn about them in school? Stay tuned, because these are the facts from history you'll swear can't be true, but absolutely are. Which one will shock you the most? Comment your guess before we begin. Wars are usually fought over land, power, or resources. But in 1325, a war erupted in Italy over a bucket. Yes, a bucket. It all began with two rival city-states, Modena and Bologna. They had a long history of tension, fueled by political, economic, and territorial disputes. But what finally pushed them over the edge was an act of petty theft. One day, Modenese soldiers sneaked into Bologna, raided the city well, and stole a wooden bucket. This wasn't just any bucket. It was used to draw water from Bologna's central well, a symbol of the city's pride. The soldiers carried it back to Modena as a trophy, hanging it in their city hall for all to see. When Bologna found out, they demanded the bucket's return. Modena refused. The insult was too great, and neither side wanted to back down. Soon, tensions escalated into open conflict. Bologna assembled an army of 30,000 men, while Modena had about 7,000 soldiers. On paper, Bologna should have crushed Modena easily. But history loves irony. The two forces met at the Battle of Zappolino. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Modena's smaller, more experienced army delivered a crushing defeat to Bologna. Thousands were killed or captured, and Modena's forces even marched into Bologna's territory after the battle, just to humiliate them further. Can the bucket? It stayed in Modena. To this day, the original wooden bucket is still displayed in Modena's city hall as a relic of victory. A replica is kept in the Civic Museum of Bologna as a reminder of the bizarre event that cost thousands of lives. The War of the Bucket has since become a textbook example of how petty disputes can spiral into devastating conflicts, especially when pride, politics, and rivalry mix. It might sound like a joke, but to the people of the time, it was deadly serious. And it's a reminder that sometimes history's strangest stories aren't invented. They're just too ridiculous to make up. So, do you think this war was about the bucket? Or was it just an excuse to settle bigger grudges? In the annals of strange military history, few stories are as eerie as the tale of Admiral Yi Sun-sin of Korea, the man who won a naval battle. After he was already dead, it happened during the Battle of Noryang in 1598, the final major battle of the Imjin War between Korea, Ming China, and Japan. Admiral Yi was already a legend by this point. He had never lost a battle, and his innovative turtle ships had become the scourge of the Japanese Navy. But as the war neared its end, he faced his most critical mission, stopping Japan's final retreat from Korean waters. The morning of the battle, he knew it would be dangerous. He even told his officers, "Do not announce my death until the battle is over." The fighting was fierce. Cannon fire echoed across the water, ships burned, and the Japanese fleet tried desperately to break through. Then, in the chaos, Admiral Yi was struck in the chest by a bullet. He died instantly. But here's where the story turns surreal. Instead of panicking, Yi's closest officers quickly propped up his body at the bow of the ship, holding him upright so his men couldn't see he was dead. His flagship continued to sail forward, leading the charge as if nothing had happened. From a distance, it looked like their fearless commander was still directing the battle. His fleet fought with renewed determination, believing Admiral Yi was alive and urging them on. By the time the battle ended, the Japanese fleet had been utterly defeated. It was only then that the truth came out. Their leader had been dead for most of the fight. Yi's death was kept secret even after the victory, to prevent morale from collapsing during the final stages of the war. His passing was later announced with full honors, and he became one of Korea's most celebrated national heroes. The surreal reality? A dead man had commanded and won one of the most decisive battles in Korean history. It's a testament to Yi's leadership, the loyalty of his men, and the strange twists that reality can take. So, do you think his men could have won without the illusion that Yi was still alive? Politics can get messy, but in one small American town, the solution was simple. Elect a dog. And not just once, but several times. The story begins in Rabbit Hash, Kentucky, a tiny riverside community with fewer than 500 residents. By the 1990s, the town's political system was more of a quirky tradition than a formal process. In fact, the mayor's role in Rabbit Hash was purely symbolic. No legislative powers, just a figurehead for community events. In 1998, the town decided to have some fun with its mayoral election. Instead of electing a human, they held an open race where anyone or anything could run. That year, a black and white border collie named Goofy. Orman won in a landslide. Goofy's administration was so popular that the idea stuck. Over the years, the town elected several canine leaders, including a Labrador named Junior Cochran and a mutt named Lucy Liu, the first female dog mayor of Rabbit Hash. But the most famous mayor was Bryneth Paltrow, a pit bull who won in 2017. Bryneth's campaign slogan? Puppy love for all. The elections work like this. Votes cost $1 each, and people can buy as many votes as they want. The money goes directly to funding community projects and preserving the historic buildings in Rabbit Hash. In some races, dogs from outside the town, even from other states, have run and racked up votes from fans online. The mayors of Rabbit Hash serve by appearing at local events, greeting visitors, and posing for plenty of photos. While they can't pass laws, they can raise awareness, bring people together, and attract tourism, which has kept this tiny town alive. The tradition has been so enduring that Rabbit Hash has never gone back to human leadership. In fact, some locals joke that dogs make better mayors than people because they're loyal, they listen, they don't raise taxes. On paper, it sounds like a joke. But the dog mayors of Rabbit Hash are a real part of its history, and a reminder that politics doesn't always have to be serious to make a real difference. So, would you vote for a dog as mayor in your town? Why or why not? On the morning of September 2nd, 1666, Londoners woke to a scene straight out of a nightmare. The sun had vanished from the sky, or at least that's what it seemed like. A thick, unnatural darkness blanketed the city. Even at midday, street lamps and candles were needed just to see a few feet ahead. People whispered about witchcraft, omens, and the wrath of God. The real cause, an enormous wall of smoke from a fire that had barely begun. That morning, a small blaze broke out in the bakery of Thomas Fariner on Pudding Lane. Normally, such a fire could have been contained, but that year, London had been plagued by a long, dry summer, turning its wooden buildings into kindling dot by the time the smoke reached the heart of the city. It was so dense that it blocked sunlight. From the ground, it looked like a solar eclipse that lasted for hours. This was the beginning of the Great Fire of London, one of the most destructive urban disasters in history. Over 4 days, the fire consumed 13,200 houses, 87 churches, and iconic landmarks like St. Paul's Cathedral. The darkness wasn't just physical. It was psychological. In a deeply religious society, many believed the darkness was a divine sign. Some blamed Catholics, foreigners, or even the king. In the chaos, rumors sparked riots and violence. It's easy to forget that while the fire Raged, many Londoners couldn't see the flames, only the sky choked with black smoke. The feeling was apocalyptic. Modern scientists. The smoke particles were so fine and thick they acted like a filter, scattering sunlight and plunging the city into an eerie gloom. In a time before scientific explanation was widely understood, it's no wonder people thought the world was ending. The darkness lifted as winds changed, but by then the fire had grown unstoppable. It would take days before the last embers died, and years for London to recover. The idea that the sun went out might sound like medieval superstition, but eyewitness accounts confirmed just how dark and terrifying that first day really was. It's one of those strange moments in history where fact feels like fiction. If you had been there, would you have believed it was the end of the world? Royal feasts have always been known for excess, but few ended as tragically and bizarrely as the last meal of King Adolf Fredrik of Sweden. It was February 12, 1771, and the king sat down for what would become his final dinner. Known for his love of food, Adolf Fredrik had no intention of eating lightly that night. The menu already sounded fit for a monarch: lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, champagne, and piles of meat. But the piece de resistance was dessert. The king's favorite sweet was semla, a cardamom-spiced bun filled with almond paste and topped with whipped cream, traditionally served in warm milk. That night, he didn't have one semla. He had 14, and after those, he kept eating. By the end of the meal, he had consumed an enormous quantity of food and drink, so much that he began to feel violently ill. His physicians were called, but it was too late. Later that evening, King Adolf Fredrik collapsed and died, most likely from acute indigestion or food-related complications. In Swedish history, his reign is remembered as politically uneventful, but his death? Infamous. School children in Sweden still learn about him as the king who ate himself to death. What makes this story even stranger is that it was entirely self-inflicted. There was no poison, no political plot, just a royal appetite gone too far. In an era where kings were supposed to embody discipline and dignity, Adolf Fredrik's end was both shocking and oddly human. The tragedy also sparked conversation in Europe about gluttony, moderation, and the dangers of indulgence, though in Sweden it became more of a national curiosity than a moral lesson. Today, Swedes still enjoy semla every year during Lent, but perhaps with a quiet nod to the king who loved them a little too much. It sounds like the punchline to a dark joke, but it's entirely true. Sometimes history's strangest facts aren't only about wars and politics. They're about the very human, very peculiar ways people lived and died. So, if you had to choose a last meal, what would it be? History isn't just strange. Sometimes it's downright unbelievable. These stories prove that reality doesn't always need a writer's imagination to be absurd. Which of these facts blew your mind the most? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe now, because the next unbelievable chapter of history might still be unfolding.